Hello, everybody. Tim Hughes here. I'm the co-founder and CEO of DLA Ignite. With me today, I've got Bob Booth, and Bob is kindly joining us from IBM. Welcome, Bob. Today, we're going to talk about how social media is impacting supply chain. Before we get into that, I always ask my guests this, Bob, where can people get hold of you?
Yeah, thank you, Tim, and thanks for inviting me here. They can get me through LinkedIn. I'm on Bob E. Booth on LinkedIn. You'll find my profile in there, along with one or two other supply chain postings.
Cool. And so today we're going to talk about supply chain. So what's your background in supply chain, Bob? What's your journey that's been able for you to basically talk to us today?
Yes, Tim, thank you. So I spent the last 20 years or so working with Gemini, then Accenture, and now IBM, helping organizations to define their transformation journey around procurement and supply chain, whether it be tech or organization and or data.
Wow, that's 25 years. Wow. And so today's an interesting day. Is that they've actually announced that there is a vaccine, or will be a vaccine. It's passed a number of the stages. So surely we're just going to go back to the way things were. But right now, how has supply chain changed? What are your customers said to us? We're saying to you, because we've now been in since March. Things have changed. What are your customers saying to you?
Maybe I just kind of think through what happened at the start of the lockdown. Of course, by supply chain, we mean organizations' ability to be able to understand the demand from their customers and then turn that into what they buy and then what they manufacture and then what they sell. I think historically, you could always rely on a decent view of the past to be able to forecast the future. And what we discovered in February and March was that just was no longer relevant, right? So you couldn't rely on your historic forecast as a way of forecasting the future. And so actually, organizations have had to rapidly invest in pieces of technology to allow them to better understand their forecast, demand from customers, and connect that to the back-end supply chain. So,
because one of the things that I've seen is that say you're used to getting your raw materials or your goods from South Korea, they suddenly go on lockdown.
Yeah,
and so your suppliers are not producing anything. So you go to Germany and they're on lockdown, then they go down on lockdown. So you've got this transient thing going on within the world. Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah. So I mean, I think certainly now things have stabilized somewhat. But if I just go back to when this first started and then just cast our view forward, the first thing that happened is kind of three things happened in parallel. So on one hand, procurement and supply chain had to go back and secure their sources of supply for the critical raw materials, as you say. The teams in procurement and supply chain were also trying to reduce costs with other suppliers, right? So a tremendous amount of pressure whilst also working at home, tremendous amount of pressure trying to manage those two things, whilst at the same time, their customers fundamentally changed what they wanted from a demand perspective. We had one confectionery manufacturer in North America who was trying to work out where to place their goods, and they could choose between single packs that go to moms and pops stores versus 4 packs or 8 packs that are going into supermarkets, and they had to find a way of just understanding COVID demand and then updating their forecasts appropriately, right? So that's just indirectly what they were manufacturing and how the supply chain is impacted. But we're seeing lots of other organizations who essentially had to make very rapid choices and move forward with rapid digitization. So things that were always on the plan of things to discuss suddenly moved forward in terms of their initiatives, and they also decided how to go about it in a much quicker fashion, right? So that was kind of casting our minds back.
So if we think about a classic demand plan for supply chain, it is based on what's happened in the past, and at Easter we get more orders, so we know how to so we've had to completely change that, have we?
Yes, well, certainly. I mean, almost all organizations, all industries have been affected in different ways. So people are actually absolutely thinking through how can we properly understand our demand, and in the same way, organizations are trying to work out how to guarantee surety of supply back into the supply base. Their customers are trying to do the same thing, whilst often trying to apply pricing pressure, right? So it's been a tremendously challenging time. So yeah, it has been difficult. And actually it comes back to, if you like, the sort of the gold that sits in all this, which is around the quality of data.
Right.
So those organizations that have done some work to solve their data, understand their suppliers, understand what they're buying and selling, were much better placed than those organizations who were still sort of struggling through, which indeed many organizations.
So I mean, we've seen COVID change, and so what is it that the CPOs are having to do to actually change?
Yeah, well, the challenge in at the start of COVID was really about how do I cope with short term? You know, what can I do in terms of rapidly? I think what organizations are now doing is you're thinking about how they can invest in the future, right? So what can we do to better allow us to understand our consumption patterns from our suppliers? What can we do therefore to better connect that consumption pattern from our suppliers to and also from our customers to make sure those two things are joined together? So actually, we're seeing organizations, invest in talent. Absolutely. Think about, where are the right people and what the skills required for that talent. We're seeing them thinking through what are the initiatives I need to take to allow me to digitize and improve the connectivity of my supply chain. And they're also saying, and actually, how do I fix my data, right? What's the golden way? How can I build a self-healing supply chain data so that, it understands what's wrong with it and starts to fix?
Right. Okay. And as an individual, what is it that, as a CPO, we've always been trying to, for 20 years that I've been in supply chain, we've always talked about the fact that we're going to be a profit center, not a cost center. And what is it that we could be doing to actually, as an individual, rather than what we do for the business, what could we be doing differently?
Well, I mean, I think what's interesting about the role of the chief supply chain officer and chief procurement officer is they are the one of the main faces out to the market, right, of their organization. They're managing relationships with suppliers, or their teams are. So there's absolutely something about what's the best way to build the right brand in terms of growing talent, and what's the best way to build confidence and reliability in terms of the brand. And I think social is a really strong way of doing that. The challenge is, how do they do that whilst also managing these levels of turbulence?
And so in terms of the shift to digital, what are you seeing the impact that social media and digital are impacting on the businesses? Yeah,
I mean, so I think there are a few ways in which it's relevant. If I look at services organizations such as the one that we're in, actually, social's become a really big factor, right? Previously, we were with our clients, we were working really closely, we're building reputation, brand, we had access, but actually now it's been even more important to be able to have relevant information and reputation through social media, have relevant content that's up to date. And I think the same is also, so that's really important because you can't physically meet. And therefore the social brand's been important for individuals, but also for the company as a whole.
And this is what you call in IBM eminence, isn't it?
It absolutely is eminence. Yeah. Making sure your social media profile is relevant to your audience, and then your content you're sharing is entirely appropriate. But the same is also true, if you like, from a sales organization and a purchasing organization. To be able to get access to the stakeholders you need to have access to, whether they be your customers or your suppliers, I think it's really important. We can also drive. So you think about what some of the other topics that are important to organizations. Sustainability is becoming a really important.
I was going to ask you about this, yeah.
So corporate social responsibility, corporate social governance is a huge topic, and many organizations are rotating the definition of value from shareholder value to stakeholder value, to include corporate social responsibility components. So I think it's really important that that procurement supply chain professionals understand what's happening in the market, understand the brand of some of their suppliers, and that helps them get a rounded view of the supply chains they're engaging with. What's actually quite interesting is, even though the supply chain professional is sort of the face to the market and is there to represent organizations, sometimes the roles become quite transactional. So you end up engaging with the market, issuing some sort of RFP document, tender, you get a tender back, and it's not a very interactive process. So what I think what organizations are starting to think through is, not only can I contract with and maintain relationships with my suppliers, but how can I make that relationship ongoing, and how can I make the interaction and performance more dynamic? So that's also, I think, a relevant topic.
So one of the things that we see is that because you're looking at this new dynamics in supply chain, so you may be in a situation where your supplier is in Thailand, and all of a sudden they go on lockdown. So then you've got to find another supplier, but find them quickly. And in this new world where salespeople are not out there basically going, buy my product because it's great, but they're actually interacting with people and providing insight and educating. If you're on social as a purchasing professional, you're more likely to find those individuals and therefore speed the process up of finding new suppliers. Are you finding that as well?
I think it's, yeah, the answer is yes, although I think it's a bit of a dilemma, right? So I think there's often a concern that as a procurement professional or as a supply chain professional, if I publish my social media profile, make myself too visible, then I'm going to be, contacted by too many organizations. I'm going to be spammed. Yeah. So, but I think that we're seeing a couple of trends. So firstly, in that situation where people are looking at alternative sources of supply, and organizations are using specialist pieces of scouting software to identify who might be the appropriate supplier, or using services to understand the market. So that's one thing that's happening. I think the sort of experienced supply chain and procurement professionals are also using either social media directly or social media scouring tools to understand what is the reputation of my supply base. Who are some of these critical suppliers, and what is the market saying about them? So we're certainly seeing an evolution of further evolution of social media, particularly when you're looking out for new suppliers in some areas. I think it brings a whole series of challenges, however. So we're also seeing solutions crop up to help to solve that. And how do I onboard some of these suppliers quickly, right? So there are blockchain solutions turning up saying, having found these suppliers, how can I rapidly bypass the onboarding process to make sure I can buy from them?
Right. And switching that round to the buyers, people that are buying, are they making choices based on understanding an organization's sustainability? And because quite often we may put a statement on our website and that's it, and then that statement doesn't change. Are we actually seeing people actively looking at and saying, I want to buy from an organization that has these capabilities in terms of sustainability, diversity and inclusion, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I think it's I think we're absolutely seeing the importance of sustainability and the various different aspects of the wider definition of value coming through. So as well as consumers who now in their 20s and 30s who are absolutely focused on, as well as some people a little bit older than that, Tim, like you and I, absolutely very focused on those things. We're seeing organizations increasingly need to be able to report out the corporate social responsibility performance of their suppliers, and so it's a combination of what feels like the right thing to do, and also a net sort of evolution in market as well.
Okay, what do you see? So what do you see as the future?
Well, I think, and we've been talking about supply chain in a very broad sense, right? So I think those suppliers that are most critical, so the strategic suppliers, the bottleneck suppliers, are those suppliers where you really need them, although they might be relatively small. We're going to increasingly see end-to-end connectivity. So we're going to see that that you will invest the time to make sure you properly understand for all those suppliers what consumption information is, and organizations will connect their supply chain together, which will allow much more choice in terms of, if I want to make some choices, better understanding product, will allow product flexibility, but it will also allow organizations to deal with upturn in areas like COVID. So I think organizations will continue to work out who are the most important suppliers and customers to me and make those connections. We're also going to see the importance of marketplaces. So there are lots of categories which historically organizations have sourced. I moved from the supply chain topic to more of a indirect procurement topic. I think we're going to see more and more of those services bought through marketplaces, and we're also seeing those marketplaces evolve not only for goods, typical Amazon.com type purchases, but also services. So the ability to be able to buy services. And actually, there are some marketplaces in place where, the buying of services is increasingly common. And actually, there's a whole bunch of social components in there, right? So when you publish yourself as a supplier in those sites, you're publishing your corporate social responsibility elements. If you're a small company, and organizations are able to make more choices about more suppliers, that gives more flexibility. So I think increasingly then that the social brand of that company will become more important.
Right. And do you see things changing in COVID having an impact in terms of shortening supply chains? There's the first thing that's been happening, I think, because of COVID is that countries across the world have been a little bit more insular than the way that they've looked, but also the fact that there's been an impact in terms of, as I said, your goods are coming from South Korea, and then they're coming from Thailand, and then they go, and so we're having to dynamically look to see where the goods are coming from, but also by actually making our supply chain shorter, that's better, but also that has a sustainability impact as well.
Yeah, no. So I mean, the advent, if you like, of the fourth sector is really important, right? So that's the other dynamic that supply chain professionals are trying to manage. How can I source something more locally?
Right.
So definitely that the source of supply, to what extent can it be more local, is definitely relevant. And I think we're going to increasingly see systems that allow organizations to actually source based upon components rather than just cost. Right. We were looking at some prototypes last year where we can look at, if you're buying some of the indirect materials, as well as looking at new items, can I have secondhand ones? Can I just understand what some of the materials are? So I think increasingly the consumer in an organization, so someone who's buying goods and services, will actually be able to decide what is this an owner managed business, a small owner managed business, and therefore can I engage them in services? Are some of these items recycled? So I think we'll start to see the sophistication available from a procurement perspective to the buyer to allow them to make some of those choices, and I think that will start to drive a wave in consumption. I think when it comes to some of the more strategic supplies, they take longer to redress in terms of sort of the more direct end of the supply chain. But I think we'll start to see those movements over time.
Yeah. So, but there could be things around. If I buy something, we want to see there is a responsibility to how you're going to deal with the thing that's going to be replaced. Just, if I bought myself a standing desk rather than having like this, what am I going to do with the old desk?
Yeah, no, I mean, we're already seeing that anyway. If you when you buy goods as a consumer, that absolutely happens. I think we're going to start to see much more of a total life cycle management, And indeed, I think that's at the point at which those organizations collecting those things will then potentially refurbish them to reuse. The challenge is, with much of recycling, it costs money in there somewhere. So I think at some point we'll see some incentives from the government, but I guess that's multiple years out, right? Given where we are now.
Yeah, I think they've got their mind on other things at the moment.
Exactly.
In terms of people, as in procurement and supply chain professionals, is there anything that we can be doing to make sure that we are making sure that we have jobs in the future? What is it that we need to be looking out for and doing ourselves? Is this about making sure that we're continually adding value and we're continually living this dream of the fact that we're going to be a profit center rather than a cost center?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me the things that I do personally are I'm just trying to understand the what's happening in the market, both from a supply perspective, but also from a technology perspective, and how they might be applicable and valuable to me. I'm trying to then, if you like, translate that into what my clients need and what my colleagues need, and how those things might be valuable, right? So how to take this interesting new developments and make them relevant, and absolutely thinking through how that value, which is a combination of financial value but also social value and sustainable value, gets applied to the whole supply chain. I guess the final thing is that I keep myself very sort of up to date from a social media perspective and relevant, and I think that's also the way it gives me a great source of some of those insights in the areas that I talked about. So
right. Is there anything that we haven't covered, Bob, that you want to add to this?
No, I think it's a good view. I mean, as you say, we started with a day when hopefully there's progress in terms of vaccines, so it's super exciting. So hopefully we can start to move to something more normal. Although I think for supply chain professionals, it's going to be it will continue to be business as unusual for many months, if not years.
For a little while, yeah. Bob, it's been fantastic. Thank you very, very much. As I said, the 20 minutes goes very, very quickly. Really appreciate you sharing your insight today, because I know that you're a busy person. And thank you very much. And remind people where they can get hold of you.
Yeah, my LinkedIn profile is Bob E. Booth. So delighted to respond.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for today, Bob. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.